Let me start off by saying I have yet to fully complete Wild Hearts. The game is extremely fun, and there's a lot to do in it, and as of right now, there's still a lot to explore in terms of story and just gameplay mechanics in general. I have gotten pretty far, and I will say, as of right now, it is a solid game, and I do recommend it. With that being said, I do want to elaborate that in terms of gameplay and in terms of mechanics and all that, the game does have a few minor issues. Sometimes when climbing a monster, with the way the monster moves around, you'll end up in a completely different area than where you were trying to climb. That does have some mild issues, and that can disrupt what your plan is at the moment. It's only a mild issue and doesn't do much to truly ruin the gameplay. If anything, you always could try again to complete what you're doing, and the game does give you a lot of room for that. It's very disruptive, I will say. But even with these disruptions, that doesn't stop the game from giving you several ways of handling a situation and different options. The builds that you use, or the Karakuri as they're known as, always give you some sort of edge or advantage over the monster. As time goes on, you find yourself learning more and more Karakuri during more dangerous situations. It feels very situational, and then the second you unlock that Karakuri, it is yours for the rest of the game to use whenever you need to. It's very cool to learn a new one because it feels like you're learning a new gimmick to fight harder and harsher monsters. Something that will give you the upper hand no matter how difficult it gets. And the creativity doesn't just stop there. You get the Dragon Karakuri, as it's called, the more long-lasting building effects, your campfires, your equipment benches, your vehicles that let you drive across a field. These Dragon Karakuri are very unique and very helpful, as it prevents you from taking too much time traveling in order to get new equipment, discover which monster you're gonna kill next. Overall, everything about this game feels very buttery smooth when it comes to going from location to location, deciding what your next move is going to be, and even just after the quest, what you're gonna do. I also could tell that exploration was a key factor in designing the maps, having you run around discovering shortcuts or different ways to approach, maybe even just finding ways to get to your location quickly. This map feels very designed with going through and just discovering in mind. You have little things to do here and there, and it just feels very fun to run around in. And when it comes to the monsters or the kimono you will fight, these are some of the best designs I've ever seen. Each one feels like it was meant to be inspired by a real animal, but it was mixed in with nature or the environment in some way and creating a monstrous creature. In terms of monsters, these truly do feel like monsters, things that are genuinely trying to oppose you and those around you and cause issues and just cause destruction. It feels like there's a threat with these creatures that I felt was missing in Monster Hunter, as those monsters felt like they were a natural part of the environment. Even the Elder Dragons, which are just supposed to be forces of nature, the kimono feel a lot more like their goal is to cause an obstacle in your path. Something that is not meant to be there but will constantly remain a thorn in your side. And I think each design perfectly replicates that, where they are just these horrifying creatures to behold, and yet at the same time fun to challenge and fight against. And as time goes on, you will find that each kimono gets more and more difficult. I think the first kimono is the easiest one, as you would expect, as with your weakest weapon, it takes no more than 7 minutes to kill it. This was not even how long it took to beat the first monster in Monster Hunter, so it tells you that these monsters can range from very, very easy to extremely difficult if you are not well prepared or well equipped. Speaking of equipment, let's talk about the weapons in the game. Each weapon feels very unique to use and has a different playstyle, similar to that of Monster Hunter. The starter weapon is going to be the Karakuri Katana. Then you have the Nodachi, which acts as a greatsword, the Maul, which is a hammer, the bow, which is the long-range weapon, the bladed Wagasa, which is the aerial umbrella style weapon, And after you beat the first chapter, you gain access to 3 more weapons. The Claw Blade, which you can see here, the Karakuri Staff, and finally, the Hand Cannon. Now when it comes to the best weapon, it's all up to personal preference. There is no one that does everything. However, in terms of variety, I will say your best bet will be the Karakuri Staff. It's a weapon that starts off with the form of being a staff and switches to various forms, whether it's a spear, boomerang, dual blades, or its most powerful form, a greatsword. It's a very, very versatile tool, but it's also very difficult to master. So if you're starting off, I wouldn't exactly recommend it and prefer you go for a different weapon. The most accessible weapon in my opinion would be the Karakuri Katana. It's the first weapon you get and it's the easiest to master. Plus, it's a very, very powerful tool to get very early on with its regular sword form, the quick attacks you do with the sword and sheath acting as dual blades, and finally, the ability for the sword to turn into a whip-style blade when it's powered up. It's a very good starter tool, and in my opinion, one of the best starter weapons I've ever felt and had a chance to use. It honestly plays very well, and in all honesty, all the attacks get you closer to the monster or away from the monster's attacks, and it's just a very easy tool to pick up. I will say, if you do want to branch out, do so after you've mastered at least one weapon, whether it's the sword or any other of the starter tools, because as you get the tools like the Claw Blade and the Staff, it becomes a little bit more complicated as you've already seemingly mastered the game. Now then, for armor, the armor sets in this game actually look very well, and depending on whether you take the human path or the kimono path, you'll get different looks in your armor or different armor stats. In my opinion, the kimono path seems easier to build. This requires less material that are rare, and it's very easy to get as you will get the kimono teardrops, one of the requirements to make the armor, very early on. But the human path armor is much more powerful, it gives you higher stats, and it's highly recommended as if you want better defense, it's the one you should go for. It is a little more difficult to create as it requires more material than the kimono path does, but I would say it's worth the grind just to get it. The kimono path seems more temporary and something you should get in case of emergency or if you really need armor at the time, while the human path is if you want the armor for a long time. When it comes to the story of Wild Hearts, I will say this is probably one of the best monster hunting style stories I've seen. I felt the reasoning behind hunting down these monsters was one of the best, and I haven't played games like God Eater yet, so I can't necessarily comment on games like that, but I always felt in Monster Hunter the reasoning behind you hunting down monsters in certain environments was just a little odd, as usually if it weren't creatures like the Fatalis, Alatreon, even the Xeno'jiiva from Monster Hunter World, there was really no good reason to necessarily execute these creatures. But in Wild Hearts, these monsters are dangerous, and the story does not hesitate to show it. In one locale, you'll see a frozen environment that used to be a castle full of life, where one of the characters was a former samurai who served the lord there. As everyone was escaping, the samurai watched as a monster tore apart the castle and killed every single person inside, including the lord he served. It's a very good way of establishing the tone of these creatures and how dangerous they truly are when you get to see the environment before you and see how powerful these creatures are and realize that this is not something to be taken lightly. And as much as I love Monster Hunter, I always wondered how could they have handled showing how dangerous these creatures were as described in lore without losing the Monster Hunter tone. Because Wild Hearts doesn't have a previously established tone where it wants to be a little bit more on the lighthearted side, it's very easy to showcase all that. And in general, it works very well. I also think the overarching theme of the story being that people are losing land because wars are happening across the entire country, and now people are focusing on fighting each other rather than these monsters that are clearly a threat, it shows how important you, the hunter, are to these people. You're the only one helping protect their home, while everyone else goes to fight off in war. And it shows that because of those two events, it's causing people to lose hope in survival. This story truly feels like a fight for survival as opposed to hunting for research or anything else. And I hate drawing only comparisons from Monster Hunter, however, it's the only other way I can think of explaining what makes this game unique and different. Because Monster Hunter is truly a staple, but I do think that Wild Hearts does have something unique on its own going for it. It should be seen as such. I think basing Wild Hearts only off of Monster Hunter feels a little odd when these are two of their own separate games, and I would prefer to keep it that way. I would never ask Monster Hunter to change its style, nor would I ever ask Wild Hearts to try to match exactly what Monster Hunter has. And I want it kept that way. These are really unique games and should be seen as such. Two games of the similar genre being able to coexist with no issues. With that being said, as of making this video, Wild Hearts is still updating monsters into its game. These are special monsters to be taken after you defeat all the main monsters from the main story. So, these are more of bonus monsters. And I still want to see the endgame content this game has as they introduce the concept of volatile kimono. Stronger variations of kimono meant to be taken on after you delved into the full game story. So, just to reiterate, Wild Hearts is a great game. It should be seen as such, and I think people should try to give it more of a chance as its own thing. If you do want something more Monster Hunter style, with something similar to this, I do recommend Monster Hunter Rise, as it is still very much Monster Hunter, but it has a little bit more fast paced, as well as the themes being that similar to Wild Hearts, where it's a fight for survival. Overall, I do think this is a fun game. I do think it has a lot of unique style going for it. I do think that each locale has a lot of care and detail put into it. Exploring each different location is just fun, including the main village where you could decide how to get around. You don't feel limited in what you're capable of doing, and I think that's what makes Wild Hearts so great. It feels almost limitless in your capabilities and what you're able to do, what you're able to use to fight, and how you're able to run around and explore. You have so many options that it feels so free. And if that's something you're interested in, a Monster Hunter game that lets you live out the exploration, adventurer fantasy you've always dreamed of having in this game with these style, this is truly the game for you. It allows you to be that adventurer, to be the hunter, to play it the way you want to, use the weapons you want to, be the you really want to be. And it's a really, really fun and amazing game. And I do hope that even if they never get a sequel, the game's lifespan lasts for a very long time to allow people to get into it even years from now, just to be able to play and have fun with it. It is, in my opinion, amongst this genre, one of a kind. And frankly, I wouldn't have it any other way. So, that's sort of my impromptu review of Wild Hearts, my thoughts on the game, and sort of how I feel about it at the moment. And because of how these games work, generally, the gameplay style that you're currently facing is going to be how the rest of the games get play out. And if that's the case, then this game is already showing that it's very solid in what it does, and stands as a good alternative to the gameplay of Monster Hunter, should you ever want one. And if it's not your cup of tea, no worries. You still have the main Monster Hunter series to be able to enjoy. And frankly, I think that's just a win-win for everybody. No matter what, as long as you're enjoying yourself, that's what matters. And that's how I feel with Wild Hearts. It's a very fun game. Any issues I have with it, which aren't really many, could be solved by either it's a new gameplay style, or it's just simply a different take on the genre. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.